The arrogant defense attorney thought he had an easy win against the uneducated black defendant representing himself. What happened when that defendant stood up and revealed his true credentials left the entire courtroom speechless and ended a career forever. Sometimes justice comes from the most unexpected places. Judge Patricia Williams called the court to order, her gavel echoing through the packed courtroom. Case number 2024 CV 8847, Henderson Property Management versus Marcus Thompson, a landlord-tenant dispute that should have been routine. Marcus Thompson, 34, sat alone at the defendant's table. His crisp navy suit was impeccable, but his decision to represent himself had already drawn whispers from the gallery. In Chicago's most prestigious courthouse, self-representation usually meant one thing: you couldn't afford proper legal counsel. Across the aisle, attorney Richard Blackstone straightened his $2,000 tie with practiced arrogance. 23 years of corporate law had taught him to spot easy victories from across the room. Today's opponent, a black man with no legal team, facing eviction from a luxury downtown apartment, would be over before lunch. "Your Honor," Blackstone announced, his voice carrying the weight of absolute confidence, "my client, Henderson Property Management, seeks immediate eviction of the defendant for non-payment of rent totaling $47,000 over 6 months. Marcus remained perfectly still, hands folded, reviewing documents with the quiet intensity that courtroom veterans recognized, but Blackstone dismissed as desperation. Court reporter Lisa Martinez positioned her fingers over the stenotype machine, noting how packed the gallery was. Usually, eviction cases drew maybe 5 spectators. Today 30 people filled the benches, including several young law students with smartphones discreetly recording for their social media accounts. "Mr. Thompson," Judge Williams addressed Marcus directly, "I see you're representing yourself today. Do you understand the serious nature of these charges?" Marcus stood with fluid grace. "Yes, Your Honor, I understand completely." Blackstone couldn't suppress a small smile. The defendant's calm demeanor only made this easier. Overconfident pro se litigants always crashed harder. "Your Honor," Blackstone continued, pulling out a thick file, "the defendant signed a lease for a luxury apartment he clearly couldn't afford. The monthly rent of $7,800 should have been a red flag, but my client gave him the benefit of the doubt." He gestured toward Marcus with practiced dismissal. "Now we have 6 months of non-payment, and frankly, Your Honor, looking at the defendant's circumstances, it's obvious this was financial irresponsibility from the start." Law student Emma Chen in the gallery felt her stomach clench. She'd seen this before, barely veiled classist language designed to sound professional. Her phone was already recording, hidden behind her legal pad. Marcus's jaw tightened slightly, but he remained silent. Judge Williams noticed the tension. "Mr. Blackstone, please stick to the facts of the case," she warned. "Of course, Your Honor. The facts are simple: expensive apartment, unpaid rent, defendant who chose to represent himself rather than hire competent counsel. The pattern speaks for itself." Marcus stood again. "Your Honor, I'd like to present evidence that the rent was paid in full, on time every month." Blackstone laughed, actually laughed in open court. "Your Honor, if the defendant had proof of payment, don't you think he would have hired a real attorney to present it?" The gallery stirred. Several spectators exchanged uncomfortable glances. Emma's recording captured the moment perfectly. "Mr. Blackstone," Judge Williams' voice carried a warning edge, "you will address the defendant with respect in my courtroom. Forgive me, Your Honor, but when someone represents themselves in a complex financial dispute, it usually indicates they lack the resources for proper legal representation. I'm simply being realistic about the defendant's situation." Marcus reached for his briefcase, expensive Italian leather that Blackstone somehow failed to notice. "Your Honor, I have bank records, cancelled checks and email confirmations of every payment. Allegedly, Blackstone interjected. Your Honor, pro se defendants often fabricate evidence when they're desperate. I've seen it hundreds of times. The insult hung in the air like smoke. Judge Williams leaned forward, her patience clearly wearing thin. Mr. Thompson, please present your evidence. Marcus opened his briefcase with deliberate care. Inside, documents were organized with military precision. Tabs, labels, chronological order. Everything about the organization screamed legal training. But Blackstone was too busy preparing his victory speech to notice. Emma Chen's live stream viewer count hit 500. Her classmates at Northwestern Law were sharing the link rapidly. The comments were already buzzing. This lawyer is trash, so unprofessional. Why is he being so condescending? Marcus withdrew a folder. Your Honor, these are verified bank statements showing electronic transfers of $7,800 on the 1st of every month, from January through June 2024. Blackstone barely glanced at them. Your Honor, anyone can doctor bank statements. The real question is why my client's accounting department has no record of receiving these alleged payments. Because, Marcus said quietly, your client has been depositing the payments while simultaneously claiming non-payment to justify eviction. This is a pattern of fraud designed to remove tenants from rent-controlled units. The accusation hit like lightning. Blackstone's face went red. Your Honor, this is exactly what I mean about desperate defendants making wild accusations. Mr. Thompson clearly doesn't understand the legal standards for fraud allegations. Judge Williams studied the bank statements. These appear to be legitimate, Mr. Blackstone. Appear is the operative word, Your Honor. Pro se defendants often present convincing-looking forgeries. I move to have these documents authenticated by the court before we waste any more time. Marcus reached into his briefcase again. Your Honor, I also have email correspondence with Henderson Property Management's accounting department, acknowledging receipt of all payments. Blackstone's confidence never wavered. Your Honor, email can be fabricated by a teenager with basic computer skills. The defendant is clearly in over his head and grasping at straws. He turned to address Marcus directly, his voice dripping with condescension. Mr. Thompson, I understand you're trying your best here, but legal proceedings require more than homemade evidence and wishful thinking. Perhaps you should have consulted with a real attorney before attempting to represent yourself in a complex case. The gallery murmured with disapproval. Emma's viewer count hit 1,200. Marcus's response was measured, controlled. Mr. Blackstone, are you familiar with Illinois civil procedure? Blackstone paused. That was oddly specific for a pro se defendant. Your Honor, the defendant is clearly trying to confuse the court with random legal citations. Rule 201 deals with judicial notice, which has no bearing on this eviction case. Marcus smiled slightly. Actually, it deals with judicial notice of court records, which brings me to my next piece of evidence. He withdrew another document from his precisely organized briefcase. Your Honor, this is a certified copy of Henderson Property Management versus Rodriguez, case number 2024. 7,000. Same allegations, same pattern, same outcome. The court found fraud and awarded damages to the tenant. Blackstone's eyes widened. That case had been... How did this defendant know about it? Your Honor, prior cases have no bearing on this matter. Each case stands on its own merits, except, Marcus continued calmly, when they establish a pattern of fraudulent business practices. Your Honor, I'd like to present cases 2024. Sevi 6891, 2024 CV 5672, and 2020, all filed within the last 6 months, all showing identical patterns of acknowledged rent receipt, followed by eviction proceedings. The documents were perfect, professional formatting, proper legal citations, expert-level case law analysis. Blackstone stared at them in growing confusion. Your Honor, where exactly did the defendant obtain? Court records require proper legal channels to access. It was the first time Blackstone's voice carried uncertainty instead of arrogance. Marcus checked his watch, a subtle Patek Philippe that cost more than most people's cars. Mr. Blackstone, are you familiar with the legal concept of pattern and practice in fraud cases? Of course I am, Blackstone snapped, but his confidence was cracking. I've been practicing law for 23 years. 23 years, Marcus repeated thoughtfully. And in those 23 years, how many times have you seen a pro se defendant cite Illinois civil proceedings? 201 correctly. Blackstone's mouth went dry. The defendant's language, his document organization, his legal citation. Everything was too precise, too professional. Your Honor, Marcus continued, I'd like to call a witness to testify about Henderson Property Management's fraudulent practices. What witness? Blackstone demanded. Pro se defendants don't have investigative resources. Marcus reached for his phone. Someone who's been investigating this pattern of fraud for months. Judge Williams leaned forward with interest. Mr. Thompson, who is this witness? Marcus smiled, and for the first time something in his expression made Blackstone's blood run cold. Actually, Your Honor, before I call my witness, I think the court should know something about my qualifications to represent myself in this matter. The courtroom fell dead silent. Emma's live stream hit 2,000 viewers. Everyone sensed that everything was about to change. Marcus reached into his briefcase one final time. Mr. Blackstone spent considerable time questioning whether I'm qualified to represent myself, suggesting I lack legal knowledge and proper credentials. Blackstone's face went pale. Something in Marcus's tone, his bearing, his precision, it all suddenly felt very, very wrong. Your Honor, Marcus said quietly, perhaps the court would benefit from seeing my actual qualifications. He withdrew a leather document holder, expensive and embossed with a logo that made Judge Williams' eyes widen in recognition. Judge Margaret Chen returned to her bench to find her courtroom transformed into the epicenter of a national story. The gallery, which had held 40 people an hour earlier, was now packed beyond capacity with federal agents, news reporters, legal observers, and court officials scrambling to manage the chaos. CNN legal correspondent Janet Williams stood outside the courthouse, speaking rapidly into her microphone. What began as a routine commercial eviction case has exploded into a federal civil rights investigation that could reshape how discrimination cases are prosecuted nationwide. Inside, Victoria Sterling sat alone at her table, her $2,000 suit wrinkled, her platinum hair disheveled, staring at her phone as notification after notification announced the destruction of her professional life in real time. Sacramento Business Journal, breaking federal investigation, target Sterling Law Firm, California Lawyer Magazine, Harvard prosecutor poses as pro se defendant in sting operation, Legal Ethics Quarterly, Sterling's Assumptions, a masterclass in career suicide. Aaliyah Johnson's livestream had reached 25,000 viewers and was being broadcast live on multiple news networks. Her followers had turned her into an overnight sensation, with #Zara Washington and #Sterling downfall trending globally. Zara Washington now revealed as Senior Associate Zara Washington of the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division sat with the calm composure of someone who had orchestrated every moment of the past 3 hours. Her Italian leather briefcase was joined by 2 federal prosecutors who had arrived during the recess, Deputy Attorney General Patricia Morrison and Civil Rights Division Chief Michael Chen. "All rise," the bailiff announced as Judge Chen took her seat. "Court is now in session." Judge Chen surveyed the chaos with the weary expression of someone who'd presided over routine cases for 20 years, only to find herself at the center of the most significant civil rights case in California's recent history. "Before we continue with this case, I want to address the extraordinary circumstances that have developed." She looked directly at Zara. "Associate Washington, I assume the Department of Justice has additional information to present to this court." Zara stood with the authority that had been hidden beneath her pro se defendant performance. "Yes, Your Honor. Deputy Attorney General Morrison will be addressing the court regarding federal charges and immediate enforcement actions." Deputy Attorney General Patricia Morrison approached the bench carrying a folder that seemed to radiate legal authority. At 52, Morrison had built her reputation prosecuting the most complex civil rights cases in federal court. Her presence alone indicated that this case had reached the highest levels of the Justice Department. "Your Honor, what you witnessed this morning was the culmination of an 18-month federal investigation code-named Operation Blind Justice." Senior Associate Washington volunteered to serve as an undercover prosecutor to document discriminatory practices in Sacramento's commercial real estate market. The gallery erupted in whispers. Sterling's face had gone completely white as the implications became clear. She hadn't just lost a case, she'd been the target of a federal sting operation. "The evidence presented this morning represents only a fraction of our findings. We have documented systematic civil rights violations affecting 127 minority-owned businesses across Sacramento County, with estimated damages exceeding $47 million. Morrison opened her folder, revealing documents bearing the official seal of the United States Attorney General. "Your Honor, I have federal warrants for the arrest of 5 individuals, seizure orders for corporate assets, and preliminary injunctions that will effectively shut down Pinnacle Corporate Holdings operations pending criminal prosecution." Judge Chen had never seen anything like this in her courtroom. "Deputy Attorney General Morrison, what is the federal government seeking in terms of immediate relief?" "Complete restitution to all affected businesses, dissolution of fraudulent lease agreements, criminal prosecution of key corporate officers, and federal oversight of all commercial real estate transactions in Sacramento County for a period of 5 years. She turned to look at Sterling, who was visibly shaking. "We're also recommending immediate disbarment proceedings against any attorneys who participated in or should have known about these systematic violations." Morrison nodded to Agent Rodriguez, who wheeled in a cart loaded with bankers' boxes. "Your Honor, during the recess, FBI agents executed search warrants at Pinnacle Corporate Holdings and Blackwood, Sterling and Associates. We seized over 50,000 documents, email communications and financial records." She gestured toward the boxes with grim satisfaction. "These documents confirm everything Associate Washington presented this morning and reveal the scope of discrimination extends far beyond what we initially suspected." Morrison pulled out a thick file. Pinnacle Corporate Holdings specifically targeted minority-owned businesses in gentrifying neighborhoods, using fraudulent eviction proceedings to replace them with businesses owned by white proprietors who would pay higher rents. The numbers she read were staggering. 127 businesses targeted, 89% success rate in fraudulent evictions, $47.3 million in illegal profits, and documented communications showing explicit racial motivations for targeting specific tenants. Sterling finally found her voice, though it came out as a broken whisper. "Your Honor, I had no knowledge of any explicit discrimination. We followed standard legal procedures." Deputy Attorney General Morrison turned to face her with the expression of someone who had heard that excuse too many times. "Miss Sterling, would you like to explain these email communications recovered from your firm's servers?" She handed Judge Chen a printed email exchange. "These are communications between you and Pinnacle's management discussing which tenants would be easier to remove based on their cultural background and limited legal sophistication." Sterling's mouth fell open as she recognized her own words. "That was taken out of context. We were discussing language barriers, and Miss Sterling," Morrison interrupted, "you wrote, and I quote, 'The ethnic businesses are usually easier targets because they don't understand the legal system and rarely fight back effectively. We can process these evictions faster and with less resistance.'" The courtroom fell deadly silent, except for the sound of news reporters typing frantically and Aaliyah's live stream chat exploding with outrage. "You also wrote," Morrison continued relentlessly, "focus on the Black and Hispanic tenants first. They're less likely to have connections to expensive law firms, and juries are more sympathetic to corporate landlords in these cases." Sterling's career didn't just end in that moment. It was publicly incinerated in front of 30,000 live stream viewers and a courtroom full of legal professionals who would spread this story throughout California's legal community within hours. Dr. James Mitchell leaned forward to his UC Davis students, his voice barely above a whisper. "You're witnessing the complete destruction of a legal career built on systematic discrimination. This will be studied in law schools for decades." His students were frantically taking notes, but they were also watching something more profound, the moment when institutional racism met federal justice and lost decisively. Back at the defendant's table, Zara opened her briefcase and withdrew another folder. "Your Honor, I'd like the court to understand the human cost of Miss Sterling's standard procedures." She approached the bench with a folder containing photographs, financial records, and personal statements. "These are the stories of the 127 businesses that were destroyed by this conspiracy." The first photograph showed Maria Gonzalez standing in front of her empty restaurant, tears streaming down her face. Mrs. Gonzalez owned Abuela's Kitchen for 12 years. She employed 15 people from her community and was current on all rent payments when Pinnacle filed for eviction. Zara's voice carried the weight of institutional injustice. "Mrs. Gonzalez represented herself in court, much like I did this morning. Miss Sterling convinced the judge that Mrs. Gonzalez's payment records were fraudulent because she didn't understand American business practices." The next photograph showed an empty storefront with a for lease sign. 3 months after Mrs. Gonzalez was evicted, this space was leased to a trendy fusion restaurant owned by a white chef who pays $4,000 more per month in rent. Sterling was crying now, understanding for the first time the real human impact of what she'd helped orchestrate. Marcus Johnson owned a barbershop that served the community for 8 years, current on rent, strong customer base, employed 6 local residents. Another empty storefront photograph, evicted after Miss Sterling argued that his clientele made other tenants uncomfortable and that his business model wasn't compatible with the neighborhood's evolving demographic. The pattern was devastating. Established minority-owned businesses with strong community ties and current rent payments, systematically removed and replaced with businesses that fit Pinnacle's vision of a more desirable tenant profile. Dr. Sarah Kim Nies, a licensed physician, owned a community health clinic that provided low-cost medical care to underserved populations. Zara's voice hardened. Miss Sterling successfully argued that Dr. Kim's clinic attracted transient populations that were incompatible with commercial development goals. Judge Chen was taking detailed notes, her expression growing grimmer with each story. Associate Washington, how many healthcare providers were displaced by these practices? 14, Your Honor. 2 family practice clinics, 3 dental offices, 4 mental health counseling centers, 3 physical therapy practices, and 2 urgent care facilities, all serving predominantly minority communities. The scope was staggering. This wasn't just commercial real estate fraud, it was systematic destruction of community infrastructure designed to serve marginalized populations. Deputy Attorney General Morrison stepped forward as FBI agents began making arrests in the hallway outside the courtroom. Your Honor, based on the evidence presented and the ongoing investigation, the Department of Justice is taking immediate action. Her phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at it and smiled grimly. I've just received confirmation that Attorney General Williams is personally overseeing this prosecution. This case will be handled at the highest levels of federal law enforcement. The mention of the U.S. Attorney General sent shockwaves through the legal community watching the live stream. This had escalated from a local discrimination case to a national federal priority in less than 4 hours. The room was filled with boxes of evidence, digital displays showing financial records, and maps marking the locations of every fraudulent eviction. More importantly, we have a roadmap for replicating this model in other cities where similar discrimination patterns exist. FBI Director Sarah Chen joined the meeting via video conference. Associate Washington, your undercover work has provided us with a template for investigating institutional discrimination that we plan to implement nationwide. She gestured toward a map of the United States marked with potential investigation sites. We've received reports of similar patterns in Houston, Atlanta, Denver, and Phoenix. The Justice Department is authorizing undercover operations in all 5 cities. Zara felt the weight of what they'd accomplished and what still needed to be done. Director Chen, the key is understanding that discrimination rarely happens in isolation. Sterling wasn't operating alone. She was part of a system that rewarded discriminatory practices and punished attorneys who challenged them. Civil Rights Division Chief Michael Chen pulled up statistical analysis on his laptop. The data we've collected shows that discrimination in commercial real estate affects far more than just individual businesses. It destroys community infrastructure, healthcare access, employment opportunities, and cultural preservation. He displayed a graph showing the economic impact. The 127 businesses we documented employed over 2,400 people, served approximately 50,000 community members, and generated $78 million annually in local economic activity. The scope was staggering. Systematic discrimination had effectively destroyed an entire community's economic foundation. Victoria Sterling's home is 7:23 p.m. Sterling sat in her empty house, surrounded by boxes as movers removed furniture that would be sold to pay legal fees. Her law firm had dissolved, her malpractice insurance had been cancelled, and her personal assets were being frozen pending federal investigation. Her daughter Maya Sterling Johnson, 16, sat across from her with the pain that only comes from watching a parent destroy everything they claim to believe in. Mom, I watched the videos. Everyone at school watched them. You said those things about people who look like me. Sterling couldn't meet her daughter's eyes. Maya, I didn't realize. You didn't realize that when you helped destroy black-owned businesses, you were destroying places where people like Dad and me belong. The conversation cut deeper than any federal prosecution could. Sterling was losing not just her career, but her relationship with her own daughter. Mrs. Gonzalez's restaurant. I ate there with Dad when I was little. That barber shop. Marcus cut my hair when I was 7 because Dad said it was important to support black businesses. Maya's voice broke. You helped destroy the places that welcomed me because of who I am. Then turned around and came home to me every night pretending to be my mother. Sterling realized that her assumptions about Zara Washington had simply been the public expression of biases that had been poisoning her relationship with her own family for years. Meanwhile, Zara Washington's apartment, 8:15 p.m. Zara sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by files and evidence that would reshape civil rights enforcement, but her mind was on the human cost of what they'd accomplished. Her phone buzzed with a text from Maria Gonzalez. Nisha, I watched the videos. Thank you for fighting for my restaurant. My daughter wants to be a lawyer like you. Another text from Marcus Johnson. That federal lady who posed as a defendant, she's a hero. My son saw the videos and said he wants to study law so he can help people like she did. Dr. Sarah Kim had called earlier. Associate Washington, what you did today will help me rebuild my clinic and serve my community again. But more than that, you showed every minority business owner that someone is fighting for us. The personal messages kept coming from displaced business owners, their employees, their families and community members who had been affected by the systematic discrimination. Zara realized that Operation Blind Justice had accomplished more than just legal victories. It had restored hope to communities that had been systematically targeted. But the message that meant the most came from her own mother. Baby girl, I watched you on the news today. Your grandfather would be so proud. You didn't just practice law, you used law to create justice. 3 months later, Sacramento Community Center, 6 p.m. The community center was packed beyond capacity as displaced business owners, civil rights attorneys, federal prosecutors and community members gathered for the Sacramento Justice Summit. What had started as a single undercover operation had sparked a national movement. Deputy Attorney General Morrison took the stage to address the crowd. 3 months ago, Associate Washington walked into a courtroom pretending to be just another pro se defendant. Today I'm announcing the results of Operation Blind Justice and its national expansion. She gestured toward a display showing statistics that would have been impossible to imagine. 127 fraudulent eviction orders reversed. $47.3 million in restitution awarded. 15 individuals indicted on federal civil rights charges. 8 attorneys disbarred or suspended. The crowd erupted in applause, but Morrison wasn't finished. More importantly, 89 minority-owned businesses have been restored to their original locations. 2,400 jobs have been recovered, and community infrastructure has been rebuilt. She nodded toward Zara, who was sitting with the displaced business owners whose lives had been restored. But the real victory belongs to the community members who refused to accept systematic discrimination as normal. Maria Gonzalez stood up, tears streaming down her face. My restaurant is open again. My employees have their jobs back. My daughter tells everyone that lawyers like Associate Washington are why she wants to study justice. Marcus Johnson rose from his seat. My barber shop is back. My son is working with me again, learning the business that his grandfather started. And every day people come in talking about that federal lawyer who fought for us. Dr. Sarah Kim addressed the crowd. My clinic is serving patients again, But now we also have a legal aid clinic staffed by volunteer attorneys who make sure this never happens to anyone else. The transformation was profound. What had been a community under siege had become a community empowered to fight for justice. Zara took the stage to address the crowd one final time. 3 months ago I sat in that courtroom listening to assumptions about my competence, my intelligence and my right to be there. But those assumptions weren't really about me. She gestured toward the business owners whose lives had been restored. They were about Mrs. Gonzalez Marcus, Dr. Kim, and every person in this room who deserves to be treated with dignity and respect regardless of how they look or where they come from. Her voice carried across the packed auditorium. Victoria Sterling's assumptions cost her everything: her career, her reputation, her relationship with her own daughter. But those same assumptions cost this community much more: businesses, jobs, healthcare access and cultural heritage. She paused, looking out at the crowd of people whose lives had been transformed by a single undercover operation. The real victory isn't that we won a legal case. It's that we proved discrimination can be defeated when communities stand together and demand justice. The national impact: as Zara spoke, similar operations were launching in 5 other cities. Federal prosecutors trained in her techniques were going undercover to document discrimination in housing, employment and commercial real estate. The Washington Protocol, named after Zara's operation, was becoming the new standard for civil rights enforcement nationwide. Victoria Sterling, meanwhile, was serving community service hours at a legal aid clinic, helping low-income defendants navigate the legal system she had once used against them. Her daughter Maya had forgiven her, but their relationship was built on the understanding that redemption required not just apologies but ongoing action to repair the harm that had been done. Sterling's law license had been permanently revoked, but she had found purpose in training new attorneys about the dangers of unconscious bias and institutional discrimination. Her story had become a cautionary tale taught in law schools across the country. The final message as the Sacramento Justice Summit concluded: Aaliyah Johnson's live stream had sparked a national movement, took the stage for the final address. 3 months ago I started recording because something felt wrong in that courtroom. I had no idea I was documenting history. Her voice carried across the auditorium. But here's what I learned: justice doesn't happen by accident. It happens when people are brave enough to document the truth and share it with the world. She held up her phone, the same device that had broadcast Victoria Sterling's downfall to 50,000 viewers. Every day discrimination happens in courtrooms, offices, schools and businesses across America. Every day people make assumptions based on how someone looks instead of who they are. She gestured toward Zara, whose undercover operation had changed federal law. But every day we also have the power to be like Associate Washington, to gather evidence, demand justice and fight for communities that are under attack. The crowd rose to its feet in sustained applause as Aaliyah delivered her final challenge. The question isn't whether discrimination exists. We know it does. The question is, when you see it happening, will you record it, report it and fight it? Or will you stay silent and let it continue? Because somewhere right now another Victoria Sterling is making assumptions about another Zara Washington, and somewhere right now another community is waiting for someone brave enough to stand up and say enough. That someone could be you. 1 year later the Washington Protocol became federal law, requiring undercover civil rights investigations in any jurisdiction with patterns of discrimination complaints. Over 2,000 attorneys had been trained in the techniques Zara developed, and similar operations had been launched in 23 cities. Operation Blind Justice resulted in 47 federal indictments, $847 million in restitution payments, and the creation of community legal aid clinics in 12 major cities. The case was studied in law schools, business schools, and civil rights training programs nationwide. Victoria Sterling completed her community service and began working as a civil rights advocate, using her story to teach other attorneys about the dangers of unconscious bias. She never practiced law again but found purpose in preventing others from making the same mistakes that had destroyed her career and nearly cost her relationship with her daughter. Aaliyah Johnson graduated from law school and joined the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division, where she specialized in social media documentation of discrimination. Her live stream techniques became standard protocol for civil rights investigations. The 127 restored businesses not only survived but thrived under federal protection, creating over 3,200 new jobs and generating $156 million in annual economic activity. Sacramento's commercial districts became a model for how communities could rebuild after systematic discrimination. But perhaps the most important outcome was the message sent to discriminators nationwide. In the age of social media and undercover federal prosecutors, assumptions based on bias could destroy careers, trigger federal investigations, and mobilize entire communities for justice. The story of Zara Washington and Victoria Sterling became more than just a legal case. It became proof that ordinary people could create extraordinary change, and that justice, properly documented and courageously pursued, could transform entire systems. Sometimes the most powerful people are hiding in plain sight, and sometimes the assumptions we make about strangers reveal more about ourselves than we ever intended to discover.